My name is Savannah Reed. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago I walked into my parents' 25th wedding anniversary reunion with a briefcase that would destroy everything they'd built. The look on their faces when they saw me standing there after 8 years of complete silence was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. But what happened next when I opened that briefcase and revealed the truth about why they really abandoned me changed our family forever in ways none of us saw coming. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're ready for a story about family betrayal, hidden secrets, and the sweetest revenge you've ever heard, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this gets absolutely insane. Trust me, you won't believe what my parents had been hiding all these years. Growing up, I was the golden child everyone talked about. Valedictorian, full scholarship to Northwestern pre-med track with a 3.9 gigapascals. My parents, Michael and Patricia Reed, paraded me around like their greatest achievement. Dad would tell his golf buddies about his future surgeon daughter, while Mom bragged to her book club about how I was going to be the first doctor in our family. For 22 years, I believed I was their pride and joy. Every family dinner, every holiday, every milestone was documented with beaming smiles and proud embraces. They paid for my dorm, sent care packages, attended every graduation ceremony from kindergarten through college. I called them twice a week, visited every break, and genuinely thought we had the kind of close family bond that others envied. But everything changed the day after my college graduation in May 2014. I remember it perfectly because it was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. I'd just finished my bachelor's degree in biology, had been accepted to medical school, and was planning to spend the summer at home before starting my next chapter. That morning I was still floating on cloud nine, wearing my graduation dress from the day before, when Mom called me into the living room with that serious tone I'd only heard a handful of times. Dad was sitting in his leather recliner, the one he'd claimed as his throne for as long as I could remember, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed in that defensive posture she used when she was about to deliver bad news. The family photos that usually made her smile seemed to mock us from their perfect frames. "Savannah, we need to talk," Mom began, her voice unusually cold. "Your father and I have made some decisions about your future, and we think it's time you became more independent." The word independent hung in the air like a loaded weapon. I laughed nervously, thinking this was some kind of joke or maybe a weird way of telling me they were proud of my accomplishments. "What do you mean I'm starting med school in the fall? We already talked about this." Dad finally looked up, and for the first time in my life I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before, something that looked almost like disgust. "We've decided we're not paying for medical school. In fact, we think you should find your own place and support yourself from now on." The room started spinning. This couldn't be real. These were the same people who had hugged me with tears in their eyes just 24 hours earlier, telling everyone at graduation how proud they were. I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Is this about money because I can get loans? It's not about money, Mom interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. It's about responsibility. You're an adult now, and adults don't rely on their parents for everything. But I knew my parents. Dad made 6 figures as an engineer, and Mom had her own successful real estate business. Money had never been an issue. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, took family vacations every year, and they'd never hesitated to spend money on my education before. Something else was happening here, something they weren't telling me. "This doesn't make sense," I said, my voice starting to shake. "Yesterday you were telling Dr. Morrison how excited you were about having a doctor in the family. You've been supportive of my dreams since I was 12 years old. What changed overnight?" The look that passed between my parents in that moment, I'll never forget it. It was loaded with meaning, like they were communicating in a secret language I wasn't fluent in. Dad cleared his throat and stood up suddenly, looking older than his 53 years. Sometimes people grow apart, Savannah. Sometimes what you think you know about a situation isn't the whole truth. His words felt deliberately vague, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed. I spent the next 3 hours pleading, crying, and demanding explanations. They remained stone-faced and unmovable. By evening, I was packing my childhood bedroom into cardboard boxes, my diploma still sitting on my desk next to photos of family vacations that now felt like lies. The last thing Mom said to me as I loaded my car was, "Don't contact us again. We need space to figure things out, and so do you." I drove away from the only home I'd ever known with $3, 0 inches, my savings account, a car that was paid off, and absolutely no understanding of what had just happened to my life. The first year after being cut off was pure survival mode. I moved into a studio apartment in a rough part of town, the kind of place I'd never imagined living, where sirens were the nightly lullaby and checking your car for break-in damage was part of the morning routine. My security deposit and first month's rent ate up most of my savings, leaving me with enough money for ramen noodles and bus fare to job interviews. Medical school was immediately off the table. Without my parents' financial support and with no time to arrange alternative funding, I had to defer my acceptance, hoping I could reapply later. The shame of calling the admissions office to explain my situation without being able to give them a real explanation myself was almost unbearable. I took a job as a medical assistant at a small clinic, making $12 an hour and working 50-hour weeks just to cover my basic expenses. Dr. Sarah Chen, who ran the clinic, became my unexpected lifeline. She was a first-generation immigrant who had built her practice from nothing, and she saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself anymore. "You have good instincts with patients," she told me during my 3rd month there. "Have you ever considered becoming a nurse practitioner instead of a doctor? The program is shorter, more affordable, and you'd still be helping people." It wasn't the path I'd originally planned, but it was a path forward. Dr. Chen helped me research evening nursing programs and even wrote me a recommendation letter. For the first time since my world imploded, I felt like maybe I could rebuild something meaningful from the ashes. But the hardest part wasn't the financial struggle or the career pivot, it was the complete silence from my family. I tried calling my parents exactly 3 times in those first 12 months. Each call went straight to voicemail and none were returned. I sent birthday cards that were never acknowledged. I even drove by our old house twice, hoping to catch a glimpse of them, but the curtains were always drawn. The isolation was crushing. I'd grown up believing that family was forever, that no matter what happened in life, you could always count on your parents to be there. Discovering that this fundamental truth was apparently conditional and that I'd somehow failed to meet those conditions shattered something deep inside me. I started therapy with a sliding scale counselor named Janet, who helped me work through the trauma of sudden abandonment. "Family dynamics are complex," she would say during our sessions. "Sometimes people's actions have less to do with you and more to do with their own internal struggles or secrets." The word secrets always stuck with me, because the more time passed, the more convinced I became that my parents were hiding something significant. Their behavior that final day had been too calculated, too rehearsed. People don't just stop loving their children overnight without a reason. During my 2nd year of nursing school, I started doing something that probably wasn't healthy but felt necessary. I began investigating my own family. I created fake social media accounts to keep tabs on my parents' activities. I drove by Dad's work occasionally to see if he seemed different. I even struck up casual conversations with old family friends when I ran into them around town, fishing for information about whether my parents had said anything about our estrangement. What I discovered was strange. To the outside world, my parents were acting like I had never existed. When Mrs. Henderson from down the street asked about me at the grocery store, Mom apparently told her I was living my own life now and quickly changed the subject. Dad had removed all my photos from his office. They seemed to be actively erasing me from their narrative. But here's what really caught my attention: they were spending money. A lot of money. New cars, expensive vacations, home renovations that must have cost tens of thousands of dollars. For people who claimed they couldn't afford to help with medical school, they were living pretty lavishly. By the time I finished nursing school and landed a job in the ICU at Metropolitan Hospital, I had developed two key skills that would serve me well later: the ability to remain calm under pressure and the ability to investigate things that didn't add up. I was also developing something else: a burning desire to understand what had really happened to my family, and a growing suspicion that when I finally uncovered the truth, it was going to be bigger than I ever imagined. 3 years into my nursing career, I was finally stable enough to start digging deeper into my family's secrets. I'd saved up enough money to hire a private investigator, not for anything dramatic, just to do some basic background research that I couldn't access myself. What I thought would be a simple investigation into my parents' finances turned into something much more complicated. The PI, a former police detective named Marcus Webb, called me on a Tuesday afternoon that changed everything. "Savannah, I need you to sit down for this conversation. What I found about your parents, it's not what you expected, and it's definitely not what they told you." My hands were shaking as I gripped the phone. After 4 years of silence, I was about to get some answers. "Just tell me, Marcus. I can handle it. Your parents received a settlement. A big one. About 6 months before your graduation, they settled a medical malpractice lawsuit for $2.3 million. The words hit me like a physical blow. Medical malpractice. Settlement. $2.3 million. What lawsuit? Against who? Against Dr. Richard Morrison, your family's doctor for 15 years. Apparently, he misdiagnosed your mother's condition several years ago, and it led to some serious complications. The settlement was finalized in March 2014, just 2 months before they cut you off. Dr. Morrison, the same doctor. Morrison, who had been at my graduation, shaking hands with my parents and congratulating them on raising such a successful daughter. The same doctor Morrison my dad had chatted with about golf while I posed for photos in my cap and gown. You know what? I need to pause here for a second because this story is about to get absolutely wild, and I can tell from the comments that you're as invested in this as I was when I first discovered the truth. If you're loving this family drama as much as I think you are, hit that notification bell so you don't miss the crazy twist that's coming. Because what I found out next made me realize that everything I thought I knew about my abandonment was wrong. "But Marcus," I said, trying to process this information, "if they got that much money, why would they refuse to pay for medical school? It doesn't make sense." That's where it gets interesting. I dug a little deeper into the lawsuit details, and Savannah. The malpractice wasn't just about your mother. My heart stopped. "What do you mean the misdiagnosis affected her ability to have children?" According to the medical records I could access, Dr. Morrison failed to properly treat an infection that caused permanent damage to her reproductive system. The settlement included compensation for the emotional distress of not being able to have biological children. The room started spinning again, just like it had that day in my parents' living room, but this time the spinning came with a horrible, creeping realization that was climbing up my spine like ice water. "Marcus," I whispered, "are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that, according to these medical records, your mother, Patricia Reed, has been physically unable to conceive children since 1995. Savannah, you were born in 1992. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto my kitchen floor. I stared at the wall, watching the afternoon sunlight stream through my apartment window while my entire understanding of reality rearranged itself around this impossible information. I wasn't their biological child. I couldn't be. And if I wasn't their biological child, then who was I? Were they my adoptive parents? Foster parents? Had they been lying to me about my identity for my entire life? But more importantly, and this was the question that made my blood run cold, if they'd just received $2.3 million specifically because they couldn't have biological children, and then they suddenly cut off their only daughter right after graduation. What did that mean about why they'd kept me around for 22 years? I spent the rest of that afternoon on my laptop, diving into public records and online databases with a new urgency. What I found made me physically sick. My parents had been receiving monthly payments from the state for my care from 1992 until 2014. Foster care payments. I wasn't adopted, I was a foster child who had never been told the truth about my status. And those payments had stopped automatically when I turned 22 and graduated college. The timeline was crystal clear now. They'd raised me as a foster child, collecting monthly payments from the state for 22 years. They'd planned to cut me off the moment those payments stopped. They'd probably been planning it for years. But then the medical malpractice settlement came through, giving them enough money to be comfortable without needing the foster care income. Except there was one problem with their plan. I was still calling them Mom and Dad. I was still showing up for holidays and family dinners. I was still their daughter in my own mind, even though the state checks had stopped coming. So they manufactured a crisis to get rid of me permanently, using my college graduation as the perfect transition point. They could tell people I was living my own life now, without anyone questioning why a loving family would suddenly cut all contact. For 4 years I'd been torturing myself, wondering what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed them, why I wasn't worthy of their love. But the truth was so much worse than anything I'd imagined. They'd never loved me at all. I'd been a source of income, and when that income dried up, they'd discarded me like yesterday's newspaper. The foster care system had failed to protect me from this emotional abuse, and my fake parents had committed fraud on multiple levels: emotional fraud, financial fraud, and probably legal fraud too. As I sat in my apartment that evening, surrounded by printed documents and laptop screens full of evidence, I felt something shifting inside me. The grief and confusion I'd carried for 4 years was crystallizing into something much more focused. It was time to plan my revenge. The next 18 months were dedicated to building an airtight case and planning the most satisfying confrontation possible. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was methodical. Every foster care document, every financial record, every piece of evidence that proved their deception went into organized files. I wasn't going to just expose them. I was going to destroy the comfortable life they'd built on lies. Working in the ICU had taught me patience and precision. When someone's life hangs in the balance, you don't make impulsive moves. You gather information, assess the situation, and execute a plan flawlessly. I applied those same skills to taking down Michael and Patricia Reed. First, I needed to understand the full scope of their fraud. Through Marcus and some additional legal research, I discovered they'd received approximately $847, 0 inches foster care payments over 22 years. The money had been deposited into a separate account that they'd hidden from me, claiming they were saving for my future while secretly using it for their own lifestyle upgrades. But the financial fraud was just the beginning. The emotional manipulation ran so much deeper than I'd initially realized. I requested my complete foster care file through the proper legal channels, and what I found in those documents was devastating. My biological mother had been a 16-year-old named Jessica Martinez who died in a car accident when I was 3 months old. She'd specifically requested in her limited paperwork that if anything happened to her, she wanted me to know about my heritage. She was half Mexican, half Irish, and she'd written a letter for me to receive when I turned 18. I never received that letter. My fake parents had signed documentation saying they would share my cultural background and family history with me as I grew up. Instead, they'd told me I was their biological child and fed me a completely fabricated story about our family tree. The letter from my birth mother was still in my file unopened after all these years. When I finally read it sitting in the social services office, I cried for the first time since the day they abandoned me. Jessica had written about her hopes for my future, her love for music and art, and her dream that I would grow up knowing I was wanted and loved. She'd named me Esperanza Martinez, Hope Martinez. The Reeds had changed my name to Savannah Reed without ever telling me about my original identity. Armed with this information, I hired a lawyer who specialized in foster care fraud. Attorney Sarah Kim took one look at my documentation and immediately understood the severity of what had happened. Savannah, or should I say Esperanza, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of fraud I've seen. They violated multiple federal and state laws, not to mention the ethical violations involved in lying to a child about their fundamental identity for over 2 decades. We spent months building a legal case, but I had something bigger in mind than just a lawsuit. I wanted a reckoning. I wanted them to face the consequences of their actions in front of everyone who mattered to them. That's when I learned about their 25th wedding anniversary celebration. Patricia had been posting about it on social media for months, a big party at the country club, renewing their vows, celebrating their perfect marriage and beautiful life together. She'd even posted throwback photos of their wedding, talking about how blessed they were and how everything had worked out exactly as they'd planned. The irony was perfect. They were celebrating 25 years of marriage, but their relationship had been built on fraud from almost the very beginning. I'd been placed with them during their 2nd year of marriage, and the foster care money had funded their comfortable lifestyle for the majority of their union. I RSVP'd to their anniversary party using my original name, Esperanza Martinez, and a phone number they wouldn't recognize. Patricia's assistant called me back, confused, asking how I knew the family. I told her I was an old friend who had lost touch and really wanted to surprise them. The plan was simple but devastating. I would arrive at their anniversary party with all the documentation of their fraud, my original birth certificate, the letter from my biological mother, and financial records showing exactly how much money they'd stolen from the foster care system. But I wasn't going alone. Sarah Kim would be there as my legal representative, and Marcus Webb would be there as my investigator. I'd also contacted the local news station, who were very interested in a story about foster care fraud and a woman discovering her true identity after 25 years of lies. The week before the party, I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I started using my real name, Esperanza Martinez. I changed my name, legally updated my nursing license, and told my coworkers about my situation. The support I received was overwhelming. Dr. Chen, who had become like a mentor to me, hugged me with tears in her eyes. "You've always been strong, but now you're also free," she said. "Go get your justice, Esperanza." The night before the anniversary party, I laid out my outfit, a beautiful red dress that my birth mother would have loved according to her letter, and organized all my evidence one final time. Tomorrow, Michael and Patricia Reed would learn that the daughter they'd discarded was not only alive and thriving, but she was coming for everything they'd stolen from her. I'd spent 25 years as Savannah Reed living a lie. But Esperanza Martinez was about to make her debut, and she was bringing the truth with her. The Riverside Country Club was exactly the kind of place you'd expect people like the Reeds to hold their anniversary celebration, all white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, and the sort of understated wealth that whispers instead of shouting. I arrived at 7:30 p.m., 30 minutes after the party had started, carrying a leather briefcase that contained enough evidence to end their comfortable life forever. I'd asked Marcus and Sarah to wait in the parking lot until I texted them. This first part needed to be just between the three of us, me and the people who had stolen my identity, my childhood, and my trust. Walking through those country club doors was surreal. I could hear laughter and conversation from the main dining room where about 50 people were celebrating a marriage built on fraud. A jazz quartet was playing softly in the corner and the smell of expensive catering filled the air. Patricia saw me first. She was standing near the bar wearing an elegant navy dress and holding a glass of champagne mid-conversation with a couple I didn't recognize. When her eyes met mine across the room, her face went through a series of expressions so quickly it was almost comical: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally pure terror. She dropped her champagne glass. The crystal shattered on the marble floor with a sound that cut through the party chatter like a gunshot. Michael turned to see what had happened, and when he spotted me standing in the doorway, I watched all the color drain from his face. For a moment, the entire room seemed frozen. The couple Patricia had been talking to looked confused. Several other guests turned to see what was happening, and the jazz quartet kept playing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. After 4 years of silence, the daughter they'd thrown away had returned, and I wasn't the same broken girl who had left their house with her belongings in cardboard boxes. I walked directly toward them, my heels clicking confidently on the marble floor, and I could see other party guests starting to whisper among themselves. Some of them recognized me, family, friends, who remembered the little girl who used to come to gatherings just like this one. "Hello, Michael, Patricia." I used their first names deliberately, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. "Congratulations on 25 years of marriage. That's quite an achievement." Patricia was stammering, trying to form words, while Michael looked like he might have a heart attack right there next to the champagne fountain. "Savannah," Michael finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Actually," I said, setting my briefcase down on the nearest table with a deliberate thud, "my name isn't Savannah. It never was." "But you already knew that, didn't you?" The whispers around us were getting louder. I could see people pulling out their phones, not sure if they should start recording or call for help. The jazz quartet had stopped playing entirely. Patricia found her voice, but it came out shaky and desperate. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is our anniversary party. You need to leave." "I need to leave," I laughed, and it was a sound I'd never heard come out of my own mouth before, cold and sharp and completely unafraid. "That's funny, considering this is the first time you've spoken to me in 4 years, the first time since you abandoned your foster daughter the day after her college graduation." The word foster hit the room like a bomb. I could hear someone gasp, and the whispers turned into urgent murmurs. These people had known me as their biological daughter for over 2 decades. They'd watched me grow up, celebrated my achievements, asked about my college plans. Michael tried to take control of the situation. "This is a private family matter. Everyone please just private." I opened my briefcase and pulled out the first document, my original birth certificate. "There's nothing private about fraud, Michael. There's nothing private about lying to a child about her identity for 25 years while collecting $847, 0 inches foster care payments." The number $847,000 caused another ripple of shock through the crowd. Patricia was now visibly shaking, and I could see her looking desperately toward the exits as if she was considering making a run for it. My real name is Esperanza Martinez, I announced to the room, my voice growing stronger with each word. My birth mother was Jessica Martinez, and she died when I was 3 months old. She left me a letter that I was supposed to receive when I turned 18, a letter that Michael and Patricia hid from me because it didn't fit their narrative. I pulled out Jessica's letter and held it up. She wanted me to know about my heritage, my culture, my real family. Instead, these people fed me lies about being their biological child while cashing government checks and building their comfortable lifestyle on fraud. Someone in the crowd, I think it was Mrs. Henderson from our old neighborhood, called out, "Is this true, Patricia?" Patricia couldn't answer. She was crying now, but they weren't tears of sadness or remorse. They were tears of panic, the tears of someone whose carefully constructed world was crumbling in real time. Michael tried one last desperate move. "Savannah, please, can we talk about this privately? This isn't the place." "My name is Esperanza," I said, my voice echoing through the room. "And there is no privately anymore. You forfeited that right when you threw me away like garbage the moment your government checks stopped coming." I pulled out the financial records and spread them across the table. "Here's the documentation of every foster care payment you received. Here's the medical malpractice settlement you used to replace that income. And here's the evidence that you committed federal fraud by misrepresenting your relationship to me for over 2 decades. The room was dead silent now, except for Patricia's sobbing. Even the catering staff had stopped what they were doing to listen. "But you know what the worst part is?" I continued, looking directly into Michael's eyes. "I spent 4 years thinking I wasn't good enough for your love. I went to therapy. I struggled financially. I questioned everything about myself because I couldn't understand how parents could just stop loving their child overnight. I picked up the letter from my birth mother. But the truth is, you never loved me at all. I was a paycheck, a source of income. And when that income dried up, you discarded me without a second thought." At that moment, I texted Sarah and Marcus. Within 2 minutes, they walked into the room, followed by a reporter and cameraman from Channel 7 News. "These are my attorney and private investigator," I announced to the stunned crowd. "We're here to serve you with papers for foster care, fraud, identity theft, and emotional abuse. We're also here to make sure this story gets told so no other foster child has to go through what you put me through." Patricia collapsed into a chair, and Michael stood there looking like a man whose entire world had just ended. Which, to be fair, it had. The reporter approached me with her microphone. "Miss Martinez, can you tell us how you discovered the truth about your identity?" But before I could answer, something beautiful happened. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor who had watched me grow up, walked over and put her arms around me. "Honey," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I don't care what your name is or where you came from. You were a beautiful child and you've grown into a strong woman. These people should be ashamed of themselves." Other people started approaching, family, friends who remembered me, expressing their shock and offering their support. One by one, the people who had been celebrating Michael and Patricia's marriage began turning their backs on them instead. The party was over, but my new life as Esperanza Martinez was just beginning. The aftermath of that anniversary party was everything I'd hoped for and more. Within 48 hours, the story had gone viral on social media and made national news. The footage of Patricia's breakdown and Michael's stunned silence played on every major network, and their phones started ringing with calls from reporters, investigators, and very angry former friends. The legal consequences came swiftly. The FBI opened an investigation into their foster care fraud, and within 6 months, both Michael and Patricia were facing federal charges. They were forced to pay back the $847, 0 inches, fraudulent foster care payments, plus penalties and interest, which totaled over $1.2 million. The medical malpractice settlement money was frozen pending the outcome of their criminal trial. But the social consequences were even more satisfying. Their country club membership was revoked. Michael was forced to resign from his engineering firm due to the ethics violations. Patricia's real estate license was suspended and several of her clients sued her for misrepresentation. The comfortable life they'd built on lies crumbled faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. More importantly, my story resonated with foster children and adoptees across the country. I started receiving messages from other people who had experienced similar betrayals, and I realized that my experience, while extreme, wasn't entirely unique. The foster care system had gaps that allowed people like the Reeds to exploit vulnerable children for financial gain. I decided to use my nursing background and my newfound platform to advocate for foster care reform. Working with Sarah Kim, we established the Esperanza Foundation, which provides legal assistance to foster children who discover they've been victims of fraud or abuse. We also lobby for stronger oversight of foster care payments and mandatory disclosure of adoption and foster status to children by age 16. The Foundation's first major victory was helping to pass Esperanza's law in our state, which requires annual check-ins with foster children by independent advocates and mandates that children receive access to their complete files, including any letters or messages from birth parents by age 18. As for my personal life, discovering my true identity opened doors I never knew existed. Through genealogy research, I connected with my birth mother's family in Mexico and Ireland. I learned that Jessica had two sisters who had been looking for me since her death. They welcomed me with open arms and shared stories about Jessica that helped me understand parts of my personality I'd never been able to explain. My Mexican relatives taught me to make traditional foods that tasted like coming home even though I'd never had them before. They shared photos of Jessica as a teenager. I have her eyes and her smile, something I'd never noticed because I'd spent my whole life thinking I looked like Patricia. The Irish side of my family introduced me to a rich tradition of storytelling and music. It turns out Jessica had been a talented singer, and when I mentioned that I'd always felt drawn to music but never pursued it, my newly discovered aunt shipped me Jessica's guitar with a note that said, "This was meant to be. Yours." I started taking guitar lessons and discovered that music was indeed in my blood. On weekends, I play at open mic nights at a small coffee shop near my apartment. Sometimes I play songs Jessica wrote, lyrics I found in her journal that my relatives had preserved. The most beautiful part of this whole journey has been reclaiming my identity as Esperanza Martinez. I'm still a nurse, still working in the ICU, but now I'm also an advocate, a musician, and a woman who knows exactly where she came from. I wear my birth mother's name with pride, and I've started learning Spanish to better connect with that part of my heritage. Michael and Patricia eventually pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges and were sentenced to 3 years in prison and 10 years of probation. They were also ordered to pay restitution to other foster families they'd defrauded because, as it turned out, I wasn't their only victim. They'd been running similar schemes with other children over the years. I didn't attend their sentencing hearing. By that point, I'd moved on completely. They were no longer the center of my story, they were just a chapter I'd closed. The last time I saw them was actually about 6 months ago at a grocery store near my old neighborhood. Patricia was coming out as I was going in, and for a moment we made eye contact. She looked older, tired, and smaller somehow. For just a second, I felt a flicker of the old confusion, the part of me that had once called her Mom. But then I remembered the letter from Jessica, the family I'd found, the life I'd built as my authentic self, and the other foster children I'd been able to help through the foundation. Patricia had given me nothing but lies. Jessica had given me love even from beyond the grave. My real family had given me acceptance and belonging. I walked past Patricia without saying a word because I had nothing left to say to her. So, here's what I want to know from all of you watching. Have you ever discovered that something fundamental about your life was a lie? How did you handle it? Because let me tell you, finding out your entire identity was fake is something that changes you forever, but it doesn't have to destroy you. Sometimes the truth, even when it's painful, is the thing that finally sets you free. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear about second chances and found family. Subscribe to my channel because I share more stories about resilience, family karma, and fighting for justice when the system fails you. And drop a comment below. I love hearing from you, and your support means everything to me. Thank you for listening to my story, for supporting other foster children through your engagement, and for believing that everyone deserves to know their truth. Remember, sometimes the family that raises you isn't your real family. Your real family is the people who love and accept you for who you truly are. I'm Esperanza Martinez, and I'll see you in the next video. Keep fighting for your truth and never let anyone tell you that you're not worthy of love and honesty. Life has a way of serving justice to those who deserve it, and karma always comes full circle. Take care, everyone.